Hello, how are we doing, everybody? Sorry I'm a bit late. It's last minute preparations. Can you hear me, please? Can you hear me, lovely people? Let me know. Can you hear me? Thanks, Green Tea. Yeah, all good. Okay. All right. Yeah, sorry for the lateness. Those last minute preparations, getting the photos together, but hopefully it's going to be a good one. So, in a way, it's still continuing on from the previous talks that we had, and what I was coming up with the alchemy talk. Sorry, just one sec, people. So it seemed to me like we were talking before. So, well, yeah, just a general overview. So we're going to be talking this alchemical concept of the homunculus, and I just want to immediately give credit to Mind Unveiled, that YouTube channel, which you should definitely check out if you haven't already. Certainly a lot of references that I got from that YouTube channel and their Homunculus Unveiled video. So I do recommend that one. So just sort of build up going through this, and hopefully things will sort of tie up and become clear as we go along. So I think this drawing here of this homunculus is connected to Goethe's play Faust, where obviously one of those plays where he sells his soul to the devil. But I believe within that he also creates a homunculus. This idea of the creation of a new life, spontaneous generation of life outside of the natural, seemed to be a primary concern of alchemists, people studying the esoteric through centuries over the ages. But also it's important, as I sort of tie in, these people who are alchemists, as with John Dee, who I've just mentioned in passing as I go along, these were the early scientists, and so many of these people that I mentioned that were into the esoteric and believed in the magical and all these things, they were also the pioneers of the scientific method that's used today. So all these people that have sort of come to believe in what's become known as scientism, this sort of dogmatic view of science, this is all at root, it's part of it follows on from the alchemical process. So as I want to go through in the talk, I think as with this headline and story above me, which I saw just recently on the Facebook page of Hocus Focus, is it? Sarah Mondaini, who pleasure meeting her, and Thomas at the talk at Glastonbury, and she shared this story, talking about how it was a break from the natural, trying to get further and further away from natural production, natural way of life, natural way of everything. And I thought this was already when I was deciding to do this talk. So basically these, if you look at this sort of image there of the idea of a baby in a receptacle, obviously it links in again the kind of matrix idea of robots plugging in and generating humans and feeding off them. And all of this, you know, it's strikingly similar to these homunculus ideas of this a new life being contained in a vessel and being able to spontaneously being produced, and then when this being is produced, it has ways of communicating and sort of precognition, spiritual, magical powers, and these can be used by the creator of the homunculus. It becomes like a sort of servant for it that can answer its questions and carry out deeds for it, much like Ariel in The Tempest, who's created by or freed by Prospero from this tree and breaks clear. He's I think Ariel's supposed to be imprisoned there by Sycorax, this witch. So we'll be mentioning Shakespeare as well, to go back to a previous talk, again, all linking up. But so much of these homunculus ideas, and I think this was partly what Mind Unveiled was gesturing towards as well. He was referring to these ideas of homunculus as being like Chat GPT, as being a sort of early version of AI, where you could ask it questions and it would give you answers. But I think also, like AI, maybe you can't always trust the answers it gives, or the servant can usurp the master and or can be used by other forces to deceive and bring about something that the creator of the homunculus didn't want. So I think there's all that bound up with it as well. That's very similar to that's very important. So Mari's mentioned The Handmaid's Tale, and you are jumping way ahead there, Mari, but definitely I think that's all going to be connected as well. I'm going to be going into that as well. So let's keep on moving, because there's a lot to go through, but it really does seem to draw a lot of things together. So I wanted to go back, and I know I've referred to this a number of times, but I really feel it's critical. So the legend of Osiris, Isis, and Horus. So this is Isis with her child Horus. The Egyptian myth, the Egyptian creation myth. It really seems crucial to me, although not to say this was the first, because as I'm going to mention later, I think the Neolithic sites and the knowledge, the mythology, the science, if you like, that went into building those Neolithic sites, they all then fed over the thousands of years into what became the mythology. It seemed like a process, building the megaliths and the chambers out of the earth, the cairns and the long barrows, and then rituals that went on around and within these megalithic Neolithic sites, and then the rituals evolved, symbols evolved around the rituals, and then symbols evolved into language, and then the language became myths and legends, and these transmit through the ages to the present day, and they are all around how reality, society, humanity, everything is perceived, and becomes a way of controlling, but also maybe to breaking through and going through to a different level of reality. But what I think is really crucial to me, and what I was reading a lot in the Ted Hughes book about the Shakespeare, or Shakespeare, whoever Shakespeare was, or whoever was responsible for those texts, and about how he had a mythological formula that followed a number of these the rituals, the ceremonies that came from the legends around, that followed things like Isis and Horus and the different versions of it in different places. But the idea, so Isis was married to Osiris, who was a good king, and there was his brother, I believe, I think they're all related, Set, who was jealous, and the sort of evil brother that wanted to have the kingdom, that wanted to take over. So he killed Osiris, and Osiris, his body was ripped apart and strewn all over the land. And this, if you've listened to any of my previous talks around the Grail, and also the legends where Maria Wheatley, who was also the presentation last week, was talking about in Neolithic, when they, especially with women, she was saying they used to take body parts around the earth to sort of, as part of charging the land, and keeping some spiritual connection with particularly revered, maybe goddess or priestess women. So the dismembered body of Osiris was strewn around the land, and then he was collected up by Osiris, all the different parts. One bit I said, except for his penis, which is a bit unfortunate. But somehow she got these body parts, and again, this is going to, so many myths that come later, and I'm going to mention Frankenstein later, but put all these body parts together to recreate Osiris, bring him back from the dead, so the idea of resurrection. And then this resurrected form of Osiris, she had a child with the risen from the dead Osiris, and the child was Horus, and he would become Pharaoh, ruler of Egypt. And I think it became a sort of regenerative thing where the new Pharaoh would be at one or become Horus at each time, so it became sort of linking into the dynasty that way. But so many of these cults that followed, and different legends, I think it goes on into these Grail legends, where there was a good king, maybe was growing old or ill, but he was attacked, taken over, usurped by an evil brother, rival, a sort of a little bit of a mirror image of himself. But also around these legends, you have the idea of like going to the underworld, which Osiris did after being remade, going through the underworld, but then ideas of being reborn, and also the idea of the old king needing to be destroyed, and then a new king coming up, because the son Horus would then go and defeat Set, who'd stolen the kingdom from his father Osiris. So the idea as well of a son that would regenerate the land, become a good king, defeating the bad. And it struck me that in a way this is also, it pervades our society now and how we think about things, you know, going into sort of modern politics, all sort of things. It's like the narrative that's portrayed, oh, this leader, this party have damaged the country, they've done things terribly, we need a new hero, a new messiah, someone that's going to take over and regenerate the land, and they'll make things better, they'll regenerate society, they'll make things good again. So you need to have the rivals being set up in opposition, and this narrative is always proposed, that there needs to be a conflict, and one needs to take over from the other, and then everything will be made right again. But I think this is a sort of twisting of the narrative. But I think particularly in terms of this talk, I think it's crucial this idea of the rival brother, the if you like the twin, or the mirror image of the hero, the good king, and the idea that there's something outside of the king. And I think going into sort of psychological things, it's the idea of the shadow. But when I'm sort of going to take it further and start talking about homunculus and the idea of creating new life, and then as it goes on into the modern era in terms of creating artificial life, in terms of AI, robots, etc., and also cloning and things like that, I think it's this idea of a replica, a representation, something that's not that's a mirror image of the real, the original, but it's not natural. Gnosticism, my wife says, and my wife knows many things. So there we go. She's in the background. She's painting an esoteric door, an esoteric kitchen door. It's unbelievable what we have in this house. So that's why I thought it was important to start with that, because that, to me, that's where this sort of idea is sort of kicking off, and where things from, and the first mention of alchemy in a text is also about this legend of Isis the prophetess, where she's supposed to have got this secret knowledge from angels. So there's an early connection there as well with the idea of with alchemy. But I think, as I say, alchemy is a precursor. It is really what was modern science. So, but to me, it's this idea, and you'd have to bear with me very slightly where I get slightly delve into my little academic life a little bit as well, but I think it's all relevant. So but yeah, the idea of something artificial being produced, and it being a way of challenging the natural order. And this, from the very earliest time, I think maybe it's where all part of the idea of empire. And when I talked before about how our earliest practices of these sort of early versions of Grail legends, they all became corrupted by empire, as Tanishka refers to it, in its different forms, where it's the Roman Empire, more modern forms of power, but essentially the same thing. The established churches, all different ways of taking secret knowledge that used to belong to everyone, and keeping it for a very small minority, and using it for dark forces, using it for manipulation of society, and to manufacture an alternative, darker reality. Again, this idea of a shadow, a reproduction that's a negative, and that's damaging and controlling, and, if you like, destroys or sucks away the life force from the original and the natural. So it's Gnosticism. I'll do a talk on Gnosticism. Yeah. Well. Yeah. Yes, Sophia, Demiurge, and of course the robot Sophia that was in the thumbnail. Obviously, they knowingly chose a name, of course, for that particular version of AI and robotics. So that's a perfect encapsulation of how the ancient mysteries, legends, magic are at least embodied in the name. They make it very clear with that robot. It makes it very clear what they're doing and the link with these legends. So just a little bit about homunculus or homunculi. So the Latin definition. Actually, I'm just gonna take my jumper off. Oh, I'm getting a bit hot. Oh shit! So don't worry, there's something underneath. Oh. Not gonna go disco dancing again. Don't worry, everybody. Oh, just go. Oh, blimey! That's enough of that. Right, that's enough of that. Right, sorry about that. So, Whisperoon says hi, Liz. Hi, Pete. Both AI and the Homunculus tap into the fear of the soulless replicant. Spot on, Whisperoon. Absolutely. Yeah, well, I don't know. Well, no, we don't. But he's Whisperoon in the chat. All right, Pete. Right. Okay. So it stands for in Latin a small human being, a little person. So I think the best known, or where it's first mentioned or given notice, was in a text De Homunculis in 1529, 1532, that era, by Paracelsus. So this is a artist's representation of Paracelsus in his laboratory with all his various different artifacts and books and all the rest of it. So yeah, during medieval and early modern times, it was thought that the homunculus, an artificial human-like being, could be created through alchemy. I mean, obviously, this is something that would be purely regarded as being in the realm of myth and legend, like alchemy itself, and with the majority, with the masses, including those particularly of a scientific materialist, in their words, way of thinking. But as I say, these people were, so many of these people that we go through that talk seriously about making homunculus were the scientists of their day, and the science and alchemy magic were interlinked, and there is so much of should we say serious science that is very much born of these early pioneers of alchemy. So Paracelsus, so he wrote about the creation, his method for creating homunculi. So sorry if anyone's a bit squeamish. That the sperm of a man be putrefied by itself in a sealed cucurbit, not sure what that is, for 40 days with the highest degree of putrefaction in a horse's womb, or possibly fermenting horse dung, or at least so long that it comes to life and moves itself and stirs, which is easily observed. After this time it will look somewhat like a man, but transparent without a body. If after this it be fed wisely with the arcanum of human blood, so again, this all connects with the idea of the Grail, because in the Grail there you have all the legends of a vessel which holds blood and has some power within it, power of life. So if it fed wisely with blood, be nourished for up to 40 weeks and be kept in the even heat of the horse's womb, a living human child grows therefrom, with all its members like another child, which is born of a woman, but much smaller. So if you like, some sort of bonsai human that's much smaller, but in other words, in proportion with humans. No one mentioning gnomes in cars. Yeah. So, but the fully also, I think this is another important aspect. The fully grown homunculus was supposedly greatly skilled in art, in inverted commas, and can create themselves, so that the created homunculus can then create giants, dwarves, and other marvels, as through art they are born, and therefore art is embodied and inborn in them, and they need to learn it from no one. So again, the mention of art, and like I was talking about representation, symbolism, language, and I think this is important because these are creative things, and obviously we're going on the idea. Mind Unveiled was talking about, he believes that people actually certainly were able to create human life, and these were very real things that they were describing. But I think it's important as well that other forms of representation, it mentions the word art, and obviously that's got different definitions, but the idea of creating something, of making something, artifice, reproduction, obviously another meaning of reproduction apart from meaning the birth of children. Reproduction can also mean making something, reproducing a painting, reproducing a work of art, or reproducing something natural but in artificial form, in whether it's a drawing or creating something. So I think these are all important concepts. It's getting a bit philosophical, but I think it's still an idea of creating something that's outside of yourself. And that, I guess, also is a lot of what magic is. It's using words and symbols to move the world. So there were several other similar concepts in writings of earlier alchemists, although the actual word homunculus was never used. Carl Jung believed that the concept first appeared in the visions of Zosimus, written in the 3rd century AD. In the visions, Zosimus encounters a priest who changes into the opposite of himself, into a mutilated anthroparion. The Greek word anthroparion is similar to homunculus, a diminutive form of person. Jung equates the homunculus with the philosopher's stone and the inner person in parallel with Christ. And these are things which Mind Unveiled certainly talks about as well. So this ambition to create life, the homunculus, it's almost synonymous with the idea of the philosopher's stone, because it's creating something out of something else, maybe something inanimate, prima materia, investing it with some sort of spirit, energy, and through that creating something new, a new form of life. So where we go. So there was in 1775 a Count Johann Ferdinand von Kufstein, who's the chap in the picture. I've got to remember to make the pictures bigger. Liz keeps telling me off for that. So in 1775, together with Abbe Galoni, an Italian cleric, is reputed to have created 10 homunculi with the ability to foresee the future. So again, the idea that when you've created this new life, that's something outside of normal reality, it has the ability to see through, I don't know, see through other realms, or to see outside of time. Von Kufstein kept these in glass containers at his Masonic lodge, so it says here, in Vienna. Dr. Emil Bezetsny's Masonic Handbook Die Sphinx devoted an entire chapter to scrying ghosts. These are reputed to have been seen by several people, including local dignitaries. John Dee, as I mentioned before, this is a painting where he's doing an experiment, which obviously looks also a bit like a magic trick as well, in the presence of Elizabeth I. But he's also rumoured to have created a homunculus. Actually, I read a novel, a fictional novel by Peter Ackroyd, The House of John Dee, sort of set partly in modern day London with a modern day character, partly with John Dee as a character, and that involved the creation of a homunculus. But certainly that's something, yeah, he was rumoured to have done as well. So he was influenced by Roger Bacon, who I mentioned if on my John Dee talk, who was a Franciscan friar, and Mind Unveiled talks about how that the Franciscan order was almost like a sort of like another secret order, you know, maybe a precursor to the Rosicrucians, Templars even, and they again were supposed to have abilities, maybe special powers or certainly secret knowledge. And this is just a little drawing representation, because Roger Bacon is also said to have created a head of bronze that could answer questions. So again, maybe see into the future and have some sort of secret knowledge. And there's supposed to be a whole little story of how he was waiting for this to sort of gestate and come alive, and he left a servant to watch over it, and the head did speak, but the servant didn't think it was worth waking up Roger Bacon and things like that. But I thought it was a bit funny in a way, because Mind Unveiled was referring to it as like an early version of ChatGPT. This idea of that you could ask questions to this construction, and there was somehow it had knowledge flowing through it. It had some connection with something in the ether where it could draw down knowledge. But it's all slightly ironic, because in that same video about Homunculus, Mind Unveiled uses ChatGPT, a version of it, to do a translation of Latin of these old books of alchemy. So it's sort of strange in a way. It's like this, the new AI was being used to reproduce the old alchemical books talking about how you go about making a homunculus. So, but this also sort of ties in again. I've mentioned it before, I know, but again, I think it's quite important. This idea of the teraphim, which again, debate about what they are, but whether they were just idols that used to be kept and that people used to revere and ask questions and think that they could get answers through these idols. But there's also I think some rabbinical texts that refer to it as being like as a severed head. And as I mentioned before, there are some who believed they were actually used severed heads that were from children. So I mentioned this in my Lost Child book because it was again so much that I was writing there around ideas about the lost child. It was around disruptions of reality and how this figure in Lost Child, when it was used in books, stories, myths, legends, films, all throughout the centuries, it was so often combined with disruptions in time, disruptions between past and future, and you see that in very modern, up to things like Stranger Things and stuff like that. So ideas of precognition and disruption of reality, disruption of what the human is able to do, but so much of that is around the idea of the child. And sadly, as obviously got to be careful what to say on YouTube, but things we sadly know about what horrible people in power do, often with children, in terms of ritual. And I think that's a perversion of so much of this esoteric knowledge. But what they are seeking to do there is a similar thing, where they're trying to break reality and gain these precognitive powers, and it's through this stealing of childhood, if you like, this stealing of some essence that's within the child, some particular a life force, and I think that connects very much again to this talk. You obviously have the child is like, again, the other, that meaning of the word reproduction. The child is in some ways a reproduction of the self. If someone gives birth, if people are parents to a child, there's obviously a passing of DNA. So there's a way of replicating yourself, but obviously it's not a complete replication. But then again, where you've got things with modern science where we go into cloning, and then that obviously is a perversion, so that it's breaking of the natural order. And I think that's probably what a lot of the rituals are about. I thought it was interesting. Again, I have mentioned it before, but just to mention it again because it's relevant, I think, where this psychoanalyst, critical theorist, Julia Kristeva, who was very influential in French thought and that sort of 60s, 70s. There's going to be a few of these French thought people popping up. But she wrote, well, and Freud as well, that the severed head is of primary importance in Western culture. Kristeva asserted that severed heads teach us that the only resurrection possible may be representation. I know these are word salad people and stuff, but it does connect with what I was talking about, because it's this idea of, they were looking at this legend of the teraphim, and again it's something that's looking back at you, a small form of human life, and it's this idea which develops further with the homunculus, where you've created something, a new form of life, and it's a break with the natural, and it's something artificial, but it's tapping into some different source of power. But with the child, there's this mingling of new life with death, sadly, if it's used in that way. But I thought it was interesting that she used the word representation, because again, I think when you're talking about AI, virtual reality, robots, these are all representations of human. AI is supposed to be able now, or increasingly be able to think like humans. I think there's still a gap there in terms of a soul, but that's obviously the thing which science has to deny, and maybe that's why it so stringently denies it, because that way they don't see that there's any barrier to make the artificial the same as the natural. But I would say it is that spiritual, the soul, which means they can never fully replicate it. So maybe that is this desire to hold power over life. And I think that's the things, that's hopefully where they won't win, because they don't acknowledge the soul. They can't grasp the power of the soul, and they try and negate it. So with that power of the soul that we do have, we need to use that to fight against it. But yeah, Mari, children often used as scryers, and green tea. Yes, I think, again, going back to my previous talks about the Grail and the idea of these severed heads, I think it does all tie in with the idea of the saints and John the Baptist. And again, also goes back to when I was talking about the legends, go back to Osiris, of body parts being moved about the land, and the idea of that regenerating the land, and connecting with the land and the king, particularly of a land. But when I was writing in my book, I was referencing this psychologist Sully, who was a bit of a precursor to Freud, and Freud was actually influenced by him, had his book and everything, but he saw things a bit different in terms of the uncanny. This, well, it's often talked about similar way to the ghostly, the uncanny, but Freud had ideas, you know, it was something to do with the repressed, something repressed within you, and that was the cause of these sort of uncanny images coming into your head. But for Sully, it was more about the idea of the shadow, and these childish fears of shadows are an indication of the unsettling feeling that there is a part of the self outside of the physical. This is the type of feeling that carries into adulthood in the form of the uncanny. Sully likened the child's fear of shadows and other experiences of the uncanny to the development in the early thought of the race of the animistic conception that everything is a double nature and existence. So, I mean, I would say probably, along with a lot of people listening, that there is a spiritual double nature to everything, and everything does have, and not just every person, but animals, inanimate things do have something spiritual, do have an essence. So I would say that, you know, this is more than just a psychological effect. I think it is something actual, and maybe again it's something that we've lost because it's been deliberately taken from us, and the mere idea of it is sneered upon. But again, I think this is important because he's talking about where, if you like, primitive people, and obviously I would say superior people in many respects, they see a shadow self, a shadow nature to everything, a spiritual nature to everything. So that is the mirror that they look at, and they can see amongst outside of themselves. But through their rituals, the knowledge of the tribe, if you like, that's passed on, which isn't just held by a few, where you might have some adepts that would then help the others through the rituals, but it wouldn't be a hidden knowledge that was kept completely from the majority. But they would know that there is this spiritual side without themselves, outside of themselves. So because of that, they wouldn't feel the need to create something which was an artificial form of life. Obviously, they created within the landscape, as I'll talk a bit more about, and the idea of then connecting energetically with the world, with the earth, and also the celestial bodies above them. But it wasn't, what I would say is to create something artificial outside of yourself, but to see it as like a double is a dangerous thing, because you can then get trapped in this automaton that's your opposite. The soulless replicant projects from the fading materialist view that we are meat robots. Yep, I agree totally, Pete. Absolutely. Mari says, I think the think bit is regarding AI is PR spin, sophisticated data scraping, more like, and I think that's very true. I think there's a lot of deception out there, I think, about how powerful AI can be. Well, I think it can be certainly incredibly powerful as a computational tool, if you like. But yes, it is just that idea of processing millions of bits of data incredibly fast. But I would still not, I would still question whether this still is missing a very crucial imaginative element, and for want of a better word, we'll call it a soul. But I think as well, I mean, when I talked about plasma in a previous talk, I think that's something where I would say true versions of modern science, where that's been finding out information about existence, which does connect him with the spiritual. So, you know, over 99% of all there is plasma, arguably. You know, some people refer to it as dark matter, but I think, you know, quite likely it maybe it's just come under this plasma. So you've got this different realm of energy, which is invisible to us most of the time, and that's quite likely a realm where what we regard as the supernatural, possibly other dimensions, exists within. So I think very much that is connected to the spiritual, and I think that also connects into the electrical universe and the idea of the electrical. Oh, no, let's go back. Sorry about that. I jumped ahead a little bit, but I'll refer a little bit more to how it goes through into the electrical a little bit later. But just to run through, just to keep on the idea of myths and legends and how these all connect in with the alchemical idea. Also mentioned in Mind Unveiled. Oh dear. Excuse me. Just because there's a text, 14th century, by someone called Petrus Bonus, the new pearl of great price, and the images which I just quickly played there from a website, alchemywebsite.com. But I think this is alchemical text. So this is sort of an analogy which is supposed to symbolically reference the alchemical method. And if we just quickly go through it, the images, it's very similar again to what I was talking about, all these rituals and legends around the idea of the king maybe going bad, being sacrificed, regeneration, that idea. So there was this parable, this king, and then he sorry, yeah, so let me just go back. Apologies, everybody. So the king, the servants come to him, and the son wanting to share power with him. He doesn't want to give the power, so the son kills his father because I guess maybe he's become an unjust king. The son kills him, and then he puts his parts, or he takes his blood, and then he puts him in this sort of coffin, a chamber, which is regarded another part of the process. So if you look at it in the alchemical process, the idea of sort of blood and matter from elements going into a chamber or a vessel, so that the son puts the king that he's killed, his father, into this chamber, but then he falls into the chamber himself, and they could become merged within the chamber, and the son tries to get out, but a third figure traps him in there. So the son is mixed, if you like, with the dead king, and so there's this process of putrefaction while they go moldy or whatever, and then after this period, the chamber is opened, and you've got the bones of the king and the son mingled together. These bones are then strewn across the land. Again, you've got this image, the same as Osiris and all these other legends and the Neolithic practices. The bones are strewn across the land, and then the servants then appeal to a divine, to God, to the angels for some sort of divine light, and the angels come down, somehow clean the bones, clean the essence of this putrefacted dead matter, and then the king is resurrected, comes out of the chamber. It's a new king, a new spiritual and also physical body, and he's a good king, and he will share his rule justly with the servants, and he's become a wise king again. So I think this, again, very similar to these ideas around the Grail legends, which obviously started centuries before that. The idea of a king going bad, maybe the land has grown into a wasteland as well, to use the terminology from the Grail legends. So there's a conquest of the king, and particularly sometimes here, I say often it's like a rival brother. Here it's the son, but it's an idea of a regeneration, if you like, the old for the new. But then you have this gestation process, which on here where they talk about the bodies being mingled and putrefaction. But then there is this divine light. There needs to be something spiritual, some energy that then mingles, cleanses the matter, and then there's a regeneration, and the king is reborn, the king, the hero, and the self. If we're just talking about it as a parable of alchemical regeneration within our own selves, come out renewed and replenished, and can rule justly and wisely, or we can govern our own lives justly with wisdom, because we've gone through the ritual processes, we've had the experience, we've had the knowledge, and we've gone through the underworld, we've gone through the shadow, and then we're reborn. So I mentioned in a prior talk where I'd read about or seen a Maria Wheatley talk at a previous Megalithomania, and she spoke, as I say, about what she thought women particularly were often broken apart into parts after death, and kept and put in different parts of the land to regenerate it, and at sacred sites at the entrances particularly, and also their bones and sometimes were ground up and put in the grooves of vessels, cups, that these could be drunk and out of. So again, this idea of regeneration, old life going through death, and then it comes through to the new life. Hey Mab, good to see you. And DJ, thanks. So I think this is critical for so many of the legends as well. If we go into Mithras, I won't go into detail about Mithras, but he was a primary god during the Roman Empire, particularly for soldiers. But he had this idea of, or this portrayed as being born from this stone. So again, it's like a idea of a spontaneous regeneration. He's almost there in a chamber, like Homunculus. So Mind Unveiled, mentioned him as being another mythical So I won't go into it all now, but obviously as I'm sure many people will know, there's very much connections with the legends of Jesus in Christianity, because Mithras was supposed to be born on the 25th of December. So much of the legends are basically interchangeable, and they were just the Roman Empire, when they adopted Christianity as being the state religion, as it were, it just took over a lot, so many of the legends of Mithras. Oh yeah, there is actually. I'm put this on a short bit later, but there's not too much of it there, but there was this a temple to Mithras in London, which many people might be aware of. Yeah, Tracy Twyman talked about it, who was sadly departed. I don't know what happened there, but she did write a book that was exposing very wrote it as a novel, but very graphic. Apparently she was on Freeman Fly, talking about how, yeah, very graphic depiction of these practices with children, particularly of well-known powerful people. But she was mentioning how, how mind-blown she was. She did it, took like a research ship to London, and she found this. So this temple to Mithras, the remains of it were found sort of on the banks of the Thames when they were building something else. But the strange thing is, they ended up moving it. It was taken up by Bloomberg, the powerful corporation which is run by Bloomberg, the guy who was former New York mayor and is obviously a real powerful, rich corporate dude in terms of all these agenda things. And it was going to be the European headquarters until Brexit, but then it's now basically the UK headquarters of Bloomberg in London. They have the remains of this Temple of Mithras in the basement of the building, basically this Bloomberg Centre in London. And just the idea that they would, I mean, fair enough, you say, oh yeah, they give money to build a little bit of a museum or so, but they actually wanted this temple to this ancient Roman god within the main site of their commerce. And again, a very explicit connection with ancient mythology and the power brokers of our current world. And we see that everything that's been going on is a continuation of these ancient rituals. Yeah, so I went there, and it was funny enough, they said you're not supposed to film it, but I did film a bit of it, and they just put a little bit of a sort of just sound, and it's like something in Latin, and like Connor, I was there with the saying, it was like we'd been part of a ceremony or something. They just had this sort of mutterings of something in Latin. God knows what was being said, and that was it. But you weren't allowed to film it. And again, that's quite interesting, because again, film. I'm going to mention now this idea of representation, recording something, making it into another form. It was interesting that they didn't want that filmed, but certainly these rituals are still important to our seats of power. And as I say, Mithras became supplanted in the popular imagination, at least, by Jesus, and Christianity became the dominant form. But I mean, there's so much I'm not going to go into all now, but this painting, which I know is very famous, because people say that looks like a UFO that's beaming down to Mary, which certainly connect with a lot of the things like Bellino and all that talk about the idea of alien races being connected with the supposed gods of Christianity and other religions. But so this is Annunciation of Mary. I forget. Do you remember who the painter of this is? I'm not sure of this, but there's several paintings of that which show this sort of divine light shining in to invest Mary with this divine spark, if you like, that's going to be the creation, the virgin creation of life within the womb of Mary. As a Mind Unveiled was saying, rather controversially, but makes a lot of sense. Basically, Jesus, the way it's presented, is a homunculus. It's this idea of life being implanted in something in the womb, but not in the natural way. So it then grows up. So the idea that maybe Jesus was artificially created, but I mean, Mind Unveils. I mean, I watched the 10-hour. I've just finally finished today the 10-hour video on Homunculus. I do recommend it. It's amazing. I mean, these incredible medieval paintings. I mean, they're frightening, a lot of them, and completely messed up in the head. But I think he goes through so much. There's so much alchemical symbology in so many of these paintings, and so many paintings that are supposed to be Christian and depicting the life of Jesus or the virgin birth, things like that, but they are full of alchemical symbols, you know, things in the background. You know, if you zoom in on things and you look at sort of figures to the side, like these shady people where they've got like almost like a replica of a city there. So much symbology in these paintings, but I think it's very much, as I say, Mind Unveiled. Do check it out. But Jesus was a homunculus as well, according to him. Jesus, yeah, there's a t-shirt. But I suppose if no. But I suppose I can see where he's going in terms of the virgin birth. It's the idea of there being spontaneous generation of life. Although this was supposedly within the womb of a woman. But the thing is, actually, that's interesting because we were just looking on a No More News video just recently, last few days, and he was showing a bit where Jordan Peterson was being questioned by Richard Dawkins, and they were questioning him on the virgin birth, and he couldn't say whether he believed that the virgin birth was a thing or not. But the thing is, I suppose someone like Dawkins and that, I don't like Dawkins either. Of course, can't stand the man. That was the first time we'd ever agreed with him. but when the thing was, I mean, there is now with artificial insemination, the virgin birth is totally possible within. So again, what Mind Unveiled and others have talked about is the idea that the timeline that we're presented for a start is maybe way out, hundreds of years out, and certainly technology, if you like, science, certainly what could be done hundreds of years in the past is much more advanced. Mari's come up with the painting. Thank you. It's the Annunciation with St. Emidus by Crivelli. Thank you, Mari. Just about to say that. Green tea, yes. So many of the angels of the Bible created life inside of women that were barren, old, or otherwise not able to create normal life. So I think it does make sense that so much in the Christian mythos is very much about this idea that totally taps into the idea of alchemical creation of life through something other than the natural method. So it's been going for centuries, but as I was saying, I think it really goes back to the Neolithic era of many thousands of years ago, and you know, hundreds of thousands of years even before the supposed time of Jesus and the Romans and the Egyptians, and or probably something like this. It's around maybe around the time of the Egyptians, so sort of parallel to that. But this is my shout in the Orkneys, which I mentioned before, having gone to. But this is one of a few chambers around the world, chambered cairns here, or the lumbaras as they're referred to in other places. Maria Wheatley, the talk last week, referred to Stony Littleton, which I went to with Hugh Newman, and had the talk about that, and Stanton Drew before. So Stony Littleton as well, I think around or a few days after the solstice, maybe the winter solstice, light goes through the entrance to light up the chamber. Newgrange in Ireland, famously, it's aligned so that the winter solstice sun, I believe, on sunrise goes through the entrance, I believe, to illuminate these the markings in there. But also this Maishau, which I went to in the Orkneys, so again the same, the winter solstice sun will come through that entrance to light up these chambers. So this all ties up again. Tanishka was talking about where she said the origin of the Grail was these practices, these rituals, initiations priestesses used to do for men and women. But the most crucial one, particularly for men who didn't have this sort of natural cycle within us, was at the winter solstice. So it was like, obviously for the Neolithic people, it was basically, I suppose, particularly when you're in the northern hemisphere, the darkest time, when the days are at its shortest, and the natural world is like, it's like it's all going into the underworld, this time of darkness. And the symbology of the sun on this shortest day, the idea that from then onwards the light would get greater, and the cycle would start to progress outside, and that this symbolic thing, I thought, very much, and I think Tanishka mentioned this as well, with these chambers, a lot of which have been vandalized, like a lot of the stone circles they've rearranged, right up to modern day, with supposed archaeologists have done terrible things to them. I know Thomas Sheridan's talked about what's been done at Newgrange. But yeah, these were often, it seems like they were burial chambers, dead bodies were found there. So again, this idea of the remains of the dead put in there, but very similar to these, what we talked about, this alchemical process, Homunculus, and all these legends going through to the Grail legends. I think when you have the light going through these entranceway on this crucial time of the year, and it's this mound which is maybe containing dead bodies, it's like going through there into the underworld. And I was in a different chambered cairn when I saw those orbs, which are on a short video you can see on the channel. But this light going in there, it occurred to me very much, and as I think Tanishka talked about it being, these were like womb-like places as well, and the light would penetrate them, and this would be like a rebirth process and a way of regenerating, going through to the different stage of life. For men would go through this practice at particularly this age of 21, where it's going through to a new stage of manhood. So these were ritual sites, as I say, and very much, but this seemed to me to be within the landscape very much a grand big version of this idea of the homunculus within a chamber, having dead matter that can then, part of that space is about a womb where people would go into maybe as initiation, and then they would come out and they would be, it would be new life. You would be like, you would go on, the new people, the new generation of men would come out to see the new day and go into the new stage of life. So much interesting stuff in the chat. The chat's definitely for people. Check out the chat if you're not in it. You know, you can read back as well. But yes, all right. As DJ says, lots of versions of the Annunciation by Mary in the Renaissance, absolutely. And so my novel goes through so many of them. And Green Tea one-on-one podcast. Yeah, Mind Unveiled credits him as referencing him of finding a lot of information which he used. So that's very all much connected. So, but going back to my show, this particular chamber in the Orkneys, and again, it connects with what we were talking about in my previous Grail talk. I thought an extra interesting element was that there was this famous graffiti, which is obviously done hundreds and thousands of years even after the cairn was created. This is all around this time of the Viking runic graffiti, which Moshe is famous for inside. But there's this graffiti of what's known as the Moshe dragon. And as I say, our friend Sally was talking about how she believed that there was a figure here, and it might relate to St. Margaret of Antioch, who was who became a very notable saint in this, basically like a cult all around Europe, where she was revered. She's like a patron saint of pregnant women, which connected to this. One of the legends around St. Margaret was that she burst out of the belly of a dragon, and so from that she became this patron saint of pregnant women, and they would often have you know, some sort of emblem of St. Margaret, some sort of, well, not a relic as such, but emblems that were supposed to hopefully give them protection when they were going through childbirth. Now, so again, you've got this idea of reproduction, and I thought it was quite noticeable or important rather, that this bit of graffiti was sort of near the back of this main chamber in my show. So the near the back wall where this light would come through at this winter solstice time. So not saying that the artist of this knew the relevance of that, maybe, or if they were maybe trying to put a Christian spin on it with this Christian saint. And as Sally mentioned, there's reference as well to the Crusades within the graffiti in the wall there. So, but I thought again, there's another connection with this idea of reproduction, and you have the idea of this idea of, so the bursting out of the stomach could be connected with the idea of a cesarean birth. And I think that is, it's seems to me quite a critical thing, where it was a way of the mainly male medical scientific establishment intervening in the natural mode of giving birth. I realize it was, or certainly it was, when it was first done, it was because that was the only way to get the baby out. But in these early medieval times, it would always mean the death of the mother to carry out a cesarean birth. But I thought that was interesting that it was within this chamber, which was also to me a place that's like symbolic of resurrection and rebirth. And of course, sadly mentioned in a unified Margaret theory, probably in the mind of those of the area where this was drawn, this graffiti, the Saint Margaret of Antioch would have been melded together within the consciousness of a lot of the people at the time with the Queen Margaret, who married Duncan, who became King of Scotland, who succeeded Macbeth, the historical Macbeth. And it's very interesting that in that play, of course, it's a crucial plot element that when Macbeth is told that he can't be killed by any man that's of woman born, and then the spoiler alert, the twist is that Macduff says, "Oh no, I was from my mother plucked," so he was a cesarean birth. So within that terminology of play, that is something different. To have been taken out, you weren't of woman born, so you were some sort of artificial creation. And it's interesting again that Ted Hughes, in this, when he talks about this formula that he says Shakespeare used within, as he went through the different plays and the history of the plays, he was part of the formula was taken from these ancient myths of the rival brother, the bad rival that would kill the king. And he said that, you know, there were so many of the plays where that would happen. You would have a king or a hero that would be noble and seemingly good, and then there was some sort of rival who seemed like who seemed like his colleague, his friend, but who would become someone who would bring down his downfall. And often this would be around sort of psychological, because he would make the hero descend to the depths within himself and become a bad person. So, and the various different undulations of this, these different legends, if you like, within the text. So you could say within Macbeth, although he kills you know, Banquo, what would be his sort of good colleague, if you like, but then he gets defeated by Macduff. So Macduff is this rival that wasn't of woman born. So interesting in what we were discussing there, he was something something unnatural, but Macbeth had made himself unnatural to assume power, as had his wife. And there's also the text where Lady Macbeth asked the spirits to unsex her because she doesn't want to become like a woman. So there's so much within that play that's around the idea of reproduction. Now, Mind Unveiled, again, as I was thinking all this and talked about Macbeth and previous talks, and then it popped up in Mind Unveiled as well. He talked a lot about witches in general and the different perception of witches, but the weird sisters within Macbeth, obviously they're seen around the cauldron. It's so much the image of witches that became the prevalent one for centuries afterwards, up to the present day. But it's the weird sisters who give these premonitions to Macbeth that will start him on his downward spiral when he becomes evil and takes power and has this tragic fall. Well, Mind Unveiled was referring to Macbeth within the play and saying Macbeth was almost becoming the character there, or the play itself, it was also like an alchemical text. And I think this chimes in with what I was talking about. Ted Hughes was talking about all this esoteric knowledge that goes into those plays. And obviously, again, with the Grail legends, often many of the old original legends from Ireland and Wales that went into the Grail legends, became the Grail legends. You know, there was a cauldron as essential to the text, rather than a chalice, if you like, what became in the sort of Christian idea of the receptacle or vessel used within the Grail. But also there's a crucial scene where there's 3 apparitions which the witches produce to show Macbeth, and these are very important when you come to what I'm talking about. The first apparition is an armed head, so that very much comes along with all these legends of the severed head and a teraphim, a head that has oracular powers, if that's the right way of saying it, so they can predict the future, which these apparitions are doing. So the armed head is summoned, and it warns Macbeth that Macduff is coming back to Scotland to ruin him. Now, the second apparition is a bloody child. Yeah, bloody child. So there can't be much more of a connection in terms of what I was talking about in terms of the lost child and how the child is used tragically for conjuring, if you like, or for assumption or creation of power. So the bloody child tells Macbeth that no man born of a woman can do him harm. So the fact that it's an apparition in that form that delivers that message, I would say again, it's a bit like a homunculus, but it's also this idea of damaged life. Then the third apparition is that of a child wearing a crown and holding a tree, and that's the one that says that Macbeth won't be vanquished until Great Burnham Wood to High Dunsinane Hill comes. But as I say, Mind Unveiled sees this text as being sort of alchemical in itself, and if you go back to my Shakespeare talk, you know, there's so many elements with a number of plays, but I think Macbeth is very crucial. And as I say, you've got the real historic connection with this Queen Margaret that was married to the real Duncan, which features in the play. Then Duncan comes back to Scotland after Macbeth has been killed. Macbeth had killed Duncan's father to assume the throne. So his real wife was this Queen Margaret, who had these holy relics when she'd been in exile in Hungary, and she had the holy rood, this holy rod, which is now obviously still the seat of the government, is called Holyrood. And I mentioned this again in my talk regarding around the Templars and the Grail and Rosslyn Chapel and those the St. Clair people that were the guardians of the relics for Margaret. So just to move on a bit to other forms of, I suppose, artificial creation of life. You have the golem, in a number of Hebrew texts where it talks about the creation of life from inanimate matter. And I think this drawing painting is supposed to be the Prague Golem, which is probably one of the most famous stories where Rabbi Lowe created this figure. I think it's interesting to me that it's supposed to be created or given power, given life, by having these Hebrew texts on its forehead. So these are inscribed on the golem, and that is it. That gives it life. So I think that's important of the idea of language and having how it has some sort of spiritual element to it, and that's able, like magic incantations, to control and generate life. So with that, just to get into the idea of language, like I was saying previously, I think that is important in another way of, it's another form of representation where we talk about the world, and some would say we make the world, we construct the world around us through language. So this guy Jacques Derrida, a famous French philosopher, came up with this theory of deconstruction. Now, I won't go into too much detail because it is a bit, a lot of these French theorists, they're a bit mind-numbing. But I mentioned it in my book, and I do think it's worth talking about, because he talks about this theory of deconstruction comes around from this. He uses this idea from Rousseau, who was one of these preeminent figures of Romanticism, who wrote this treatise on education called Emile, but it was supposed to be like a memory of time past, about childhood. Derrida took this, and he said there was this idea, he came up with this concept of the supplement, which I said is sort of like an original sin of language, because it's an idea that, again, he's taking Rousseau's words, but this idea of the child that's supposed to be innocent, this romantic child that's connected with nature, connected with the natural. But he was saying alongside that, basically, the child has to be educated to survive, going on what Rousseau was talking about. So this education is necessary, but it's the idea that if the child was completely of nature, it wouldn't need some sort of education. It should be able to survive on its own. But in fact, it needs education. It needs to be taught how to move in the world, how to construct the world. But along with that, you have the idea of language. And he says, get my teeth in, sorry, getting dry mouth. So let me just get to it. So Derrida's concept of the supplement, a sort of original sin of language, derived from the romantic child through the representations of memory into language. Derrida formulates his theory through discussion of Rousseau's text, particularly Emile. In Emile, Rousseau acknowledges the need for education to help children and supply what they lack in intelligence or in strength. So, although Rousseau is famous for privileging nature and saying nature is all important, so it ought to be self-sufficient, the child, but he stresses the need for education to provide what nature cannot, to fill a lack. So without childhood, no supplement would ever appear in nature. The supplement is here both humanity's good fortune and the origin of its perversion. So it's good because if man had not begun by being a child, the human race would have perished, since they needed the period of infancy to discover their needs and learn how to function. But conversely, children become unmanageable if they think of people as tools to supplement their own weakness and learn to move the world by simply moving the tongue. Now, I compared this to original sin in Christianity because it's sort of putting this deceptiveness within the child, almost that it's something that will come out of the child, and that it will be manipulative. And Derrida then goes to talk about this idea that the scandal, that the child with the sign can manipulate others. And I would say that this is putting the child at this central idea of creating something outside of herself through representation, but it's making the child seem like the creator of it, but almost like that there's some sort of original evil in there. Where I was going in my book is the idea that the child is intrinsic to the idea of language, and because of that, it's intrinsic to our state of our knowledge of ourself and the idea of reality. And so then the lost child was such a disruption of that it really makes us question how the world around us is created, and it makes us uncertain of how everything gets disrupted. The structures of society, time, language, everything falls apart, which is what came up in my novel. But where in a lot of the early theological texts, they came up with the idea that they said that there was an original language of God where there was no deception, it was all truth. So it was impossible for God to lie, if you like. So that there was this language which was so when it became the language of man, it then became deceptive, the ability to lie. But also alongside that is the ability to create. I think I mentioned on a previous talk, it's like China Melville was talking about the novelist when I heard him talking about his novel Embassy Town, which is set in a alien world where they can't lie. So but because of that, as he was saying, he was thinking, well, if you can't lie, you can't create something, you can't imagine something and put it down that's a metaphor. But basically fiction isn't possible if you can only write something that has truthfully happened. Yeah, you couldn't have any actors. So that, when you might think, well, yeah, that is a good state, because we know artifice, acting, we get deception, and that's where we are with the people that run the world. We are deceived, and so much of, as we know, as we've talked about, the media, the arts, are used as forms to deceive us and create a kind of reality for us, which is unnatural, which is a way of someone else taking power over us. But I mean, I suppose it is a dilemma, especially as I'm someone who's interested in writing and the arts and fiction. The idea of this not having that seems terrible to me. But maybe there is this idea that that's all bound up. It's an even deeper, bigger version of this idea of wanting to create a homunculus. It's the idea where we want to create something outside of ourselves, whether it's a painting or it's writing a novel or building something. You know, the ties in with the idea of the Tower of Babel. This is esoteric door. So it is part of us. Maybe it is intrinsic to us that we have this artifice, but I suppose that's the difference, because we're not gods. So that's the point. For us, we're on this earth, and I would say as long as we are maybe you can't know for sure all of the reasons, but for the Neolithic people, they were building within the landscape, trying to connect with it and the sky, what was up in the sky, but not to build something which was a different form of life outside themselves. Let's see. Now, as we're on French philosophers, I thought I'd try and get them all out of the way at the same time. So I think this is a way of sort of developing those idea of the creation of the modern world, but how it's a division from the natural, but how that affects us as humans and how that figures into the modern world, particularly these ideas of artificial reproduction and everything that goes on with AI, etc. But this is Baudrillard, of a primary sort of philosopher for what's the term? Postmodernism, and the idea of things not being real within the modern world, because and he writes about a lot of these things around, you know, the media and how so much what we perceive is through images that are given to us, so we can't really know what's real. I think he did a famous essay that it's called something like "The Gulf War does not exist," or that did not happen, or something like that. I once saw a lecture with a very blunt lecturer, and he was like, well, that's bloody news to the people that died in it. But I think, again, he was trying to get this idea that for many people it was just, we only see what we're given in images, and as we know, not that I'm saying Baudrillard was on our side as such, talking it in terms that we would, but of course the image is used to deceive and create a reality of the people that control those images, what they want to project, which is so often not true reality. But what interests me when I was researching my novels, what he has written about modern childhood, and he talked about how modern children in Western society are simply a mini extension of their parents, a sort of byproduct of an incestuous doubling, conceived as an ideal outgrowth in your image, the clone child. So obviously we know that cloning itself is a scientific thing which is going all speed ahead, but in terms of the society, the perceptions of childhood, etc. There was also this idea then that of a parents just producing a clone image of themselves, and I think this is important. Again, it goes to this breaking off of the rituals where we've lost these connections before. So in Baudrillard's view, this excludes modern children from the traditional stages of development, where they begin to see themselves as separate from their parents after a period of identifying with them. Instead, the child's otherness re-emerges, but differently, in the form of a vast, shady complicity on the part of a generation which is at last free from adult attention. And I think we can all see where, you know, there's a lot of brokenness in society, and so much has been damaged, the connection between parents and children, which is all part, on another level, of this damaging of the natural reproductive process and the natural cycles of life, and how they're manipulated, controlled, and messed about with, because the powers that shouldn't be want some other form. Baudrillard argues that the specific problem of childhood is inseparable from those of sexuality, drugs, violence, hatred, and all the insolvable problems posed by social exclusion. He asserts that children have become a dark continent which is interesting phraseology. He even refers to children as a species, a wild, delinquent, criminal species. He places children as a whole in a marginalized territory alongside the masses. So he lists some examples of child violence in this article against other children and adults, and argues that the cause is beyond simple psychological, social, or moral terms, and actually arises out of the very breakdown of the biological and symbolic orders. Now, he obviously referring in terms of sort of psychoanalysis, and a lot of those things, the idea of these different stages that you go through. Obviously Freud, and you sort of talk about the Oedipal and all that kind of thing. I'm not, you know, I know there's all sorts of problems with Freud and the rest of it, but I would say these symbolic orders he's talking about, what is actually most important are these symbolic orders from thousands of years ago. And I know I keep mentioning Tanishka, I'm not saying that she knows everything, but so much I think made sense in terms of these legends, which other people have talked about as well, of course, where it was these primal connections with nature, the natural way of doing things, going through the cycles of life, initiatory processes to enable children as they're growing to handle these different aspects of themselves as they go through different stages of life, and they go through to adulthood. And then as you go through adulthood, again, there's different stages, and there's rituals, initiations to help you through that and develop psychologically, spiritually, to get through these different trials that go through life. And then you go through different phases to come through wisdom to, if you like, the crone or the wise man. But we need these processes, and where these French philosophers wouldn't talk in those sort of terms probably, but I think really they're just trying to come up with modern versions. But it all comes back to, yes, there's a breakdown in the symbolic order and the way with how people perceive themselves and how they can deal with their shadows and just deal with life. So I mean, again, there was talking about French psychoanalysis. Lacan defined this sort of symbolic order of when children enter the language system and accept definition of laws which determine the name of the father. And there's also this talk around the kind of the mirror stage. So I think that does connect with some things which, again, I think resonate with spiritual and with old sort of rituals and myths. And I'll sort of go on to that a bit in a moment. But I mean, yeah, a lot of the French theorists talk about Freud and the Oedipal drama. But I'm agree. As I mentioned, this earlier psychoanalyst Sully, who was pre-Freud, and he said it's not the Oedipal drama isn't the crucial drama in life. It's more about the violence of parents towards children. And certainly, if you look at so many fairy tales and myths, as also I've talked about in previous talks, so much of it is around violence of towards children, you know, abandoning them, Hansel and Gretel, children being eaten. It's central to the core of our mythology that has come up through the centuries. But yeah, Baudrillard was saying the child remains in a pre-reality principle, infantile state, which means he doesn't have a symbolic break with parents, just a pure and simple rejection. So I think, you know, whichever terms you look at it, I think it's clear there's breakdowns in society, and you know, there's certainly children without a place knowing where they're going to go, and this would also be made harder maybe with things like AI taking jobs away and that sort of thing. But in general, people are lost. adults and children, because there is this misconnection with what should be reality, which should be the connection with the natural world and our consciousness, what's all around us. Rachel says, do you think they've replaced the initiation rituals with all their courses degrees? Well, yeah, I think that's definitely what they have. And I know, you know, ironically as well, all these sort of French theorists and all that sort of thing, they're obviously bound up in a lot of the in the academic discourse, which, and that our academic system is just another system amongst all the other, where it's a way of manipulating thought, and again getting it to a different level. But I think like a lot of these things, if you try and see through them and look at them a different way, maybe they can they are tapping into certain bits of knowledge, but maybe just not in the way that they intend. But like so much, they can be misused. But I did mention Lacan and this mirror stage, where I think he talks about how infantile development, where I think he referred to it as like where the child first sees its own image in a mirror, and it's the idea that, you know, there's this other representation image which is itself but not itself, it's just an image. So that splitting, doubling of the self, and I think that is part of representation, and that goes on then to this idea of wanting to build another form of life, I think. But another side, though, again, my novel was talking about it, is the idea of just we are creating an astral homunculus, so like a spiritual version of yourself, and referred to using a mirror and candlelight. Interestingly, not artificial bright light, and we know what they're doing with LED lights and that sort of thing. So it is damaging. Well, we know it's damaging to your mitochondrials, and it's not good for you. But also, it was just interesting. It was like, oh, that disrupts this sort of spiritual connection. I guess it's just another element of the artificial and the created. I know we saw a good presentation at an Uprise and Shine, chat talking about the effect of light, and obviously how it disrupts your natural rhythms, because we're, you know, we normally would, you know, shut down at night time, or, you know, the unnatural light, you know, messes with your mind, messes with your body as well. But in terms of this spiritual homunculus, if one of those is created, but if it's got no vessel to go in, then there will be a created spirit that could then develop on and become sort of like an elemental spirit. So maybe that's more the idea of where you should go. But I suppose again, it's depending where how you're trying to use it. And again, if you're wanting to try and create some spiritual doubling, which is a way of creating power over others, or manipulating the world, then that's harmful. But maybe the idea of creating some spiritual part outside of yourself, that's where it should be. Not losing sight of yourself, but to develop the spirit. I guess that's what the ideal that we all go for. But yeah, to start bringing it into the technological age, this is an interesting drawing. So this is I think from Kingsley's novel The Water Babies, which I've never read or seen the film of, but this old drawing of the, you know, in the 1800s, and this was Thomas Huxley, who was grandfather to Aldous Huxley and Julian Huxley, and we all know about them. And this image, I think that's supposed to be Robert Owen over there. I think they had these debates over origins of the species, because Huxley, interestingly, is known as Darwin's bulldog. I know Sheep Farm have talked about him, haven't they? I think when they're in their Huxley or analysis of the Huxley family. It does. It does look like that. I was just thinking that. That's quite. Yeah, Liz was just saying that image. It looks like he's got a phone and a selfie stick there, which it really does. And we all know that the phones are very much, you know, as we talked about, modern sort of scrying things, and again part of this technological manipulation. But yeah, that's quite spooky there. How that, I don't remember seeing that before. It just suddenly like jumped out. That is exactly what it looks like. But yes, again, it's sort of like the creation of a homunculus, a small life, like a child, in some sort of vessel container. But interesting, Huxley was, as I say, it was called Darwin's bulldog, and he passionately promoted Darwin and the evolution theory of Darwin, that this should be the dominant, you know, theory, and this was the correct theory. So, you know, that's quite interesting about why he was such a proponent of that. Obviously, some people have talked about Darwin, how it got taken up in the sort of Victorian psyche, because the idea of the survival of the fittest was used then as being a sort of justification for empire and for the taking over of other races, because the Victorians saw themselves as, you know, this superior development. So the apogee of evolution at the time. But in a way, I suppose you look at the theory of evolution, Darwin's theory of evolution. I know it goes over millennia, so it's hardly like a spontaneous generation like a homunculus. But you've got these ideas of mutation, of life evolving, life merging from one thing to another. And of course, the idea, you know, the importance of his family connections, and then Julian, as we know, of all his connections with UNICEF and his other early UN agencies, a famous biologist, but also a famous eugenicist. So, and Aldous, of course, in Brave New World, this early dystopia, although it is basically our world since in so many ways, but of course within Brave New World you have the artificial production, the test tube babies, ahead of its time, because again he was someone that was in the know with what was happening. But there you have again, you know, a test tube baby. It's just a modern scientific version of the homunculus. It's a glass vessel which contains the beginning of life, and they grow new life, children, people, from, you know, chemical reactions, and it can be done, you know, outside of human reproductive thing. So, and as part of Brave New World, of course, there was this artificial reproduction, but then on the other side, sex was just used as a way of distracting and manipulating the workers. So they're produced artificially. They don't have any connection with parents or the natural world. And of course, this is what the savage is railing against. But it's this idea that they are the people in the society there are broken away from the natural order. And yeah, I do remember, like, decades ago, I remember just listening to something on daytime radio, Radio 5 probably. I can't remember the exact topic of the talk, but there was someone in there. I don't know if they were actually a scientist or a doctor or just some sort of expert. But I clearly remember him saying that, oh, we need to separate sex from reproduction. And it's Brave New World. And yeah, just openly saying it, and it obviously struck in my mind at that time. But that is, again, the modern scientism plan of how they see the world should be. So people like Julian Huxley, I think he was a well-known biologist, and Thomas Huxley there was a famous biologist of his time as well. So this is going into the more modern era, but how these ideas of what's coming into modern science, but it's still a follow-on, a continuation of these ideas of the creation of life. And this chap is, I think, is it Andrew Cross? Let me just, Andrew Cross. So born in 1784, humble scientist Andrew Cross, fascinated with electricity, constantly experimented with it throughout his life. And he did work with atmospheric electricity, so we've obviously got a picture of him there with lovely lightning, and this goes back to what I was talked about before with plasma. So not a million miles away from here, an hour and a half away, the Quantock Hills, known as the Thunder and Lightning Man. In 1836, whilst he was working in his laboratory in Broomfield, one of his experiments resulted in a creation that science has yet to explain. Hoping to use electricity to create silicate crystal, Cross accidentally dropped some solution onto a piece of volcanic stone. That's very alchemical for a start. It's so much is around the idea of a stone, philosopher's stone. I've talked before about these meteorite stones and the importance of them, mythology. So the idea of Mithras coming out of a stone, and volcanic obviously is very about the eruption of life from the earth. Accidentally dropped some solution onto a piece of volcanic stone. 2 weeks later, he found mite-like creatures had appeared on the piece of volcanic rock. He sent samples off to the Natural History Museum, but even they couldn't relate them to any other living creature. When he publicized his findings to newspapers, however, he was accused by religious groups and scientists as someone who wanted to rival God.
I bet he didn't do it accidentally. He just said he was burning a mistake.
Well, he was 1836. Not quite burnt at the stake, but the next equivalent. So, after his extraordinary experiment, Cross gave lectures, and Mary Shelley was believed to have watched at least one of these lectures, and this may have given her the inspiration to write a signature novel. So the events of 1836 were to have an impact on the rest of his life. After false accusations he was claiming to have created life, he was devastated and became more reclusive as he increased in age. So I think I can mention there, just have a picture of an old, is that Boris Karloff, that version? But yeah, obviously an incredibly enduring image, Frankenstein's monster. But yeah, it's, so yeah, probably inspired partly by the Andrew Cross's experiment with electricity and the idea that that can spark life. But also it taps into all these myths and legends, the golem. But, you know, even going back, as I was saying, to Osiris, Isis, you know, his limbs and everything, all parts of his body all split and asunder and all around the land. And Isis collected them all up, all the bits of him, and put them all together to create to recreate him and to bring him back to life. So again, you know, it's such a powerful story, and she wrote part of it, Bath, down the road here, so in Mary Shelley. But yeah, another critical parable about science's desire to create life, and but also the damage, because obviously, again, as some of the legends of the golem are, that he got out of control and caused damage, can cause destruction, and that's of course what Frankenstein's monster does. So it can't be controlled once it's created, and causes destruction. And many would see that as an important parable to bear in mind, which of course they won't, especially as they are doing away with sciences and humanities, the idea of sort of questioning philosophically, if you like, ethics, absolutely, which is one of that trivium things, isn't it, really? So yeah, whether we should do something and what's the repercussions of it, and just, but this, what can become an insane desire, as the alchemist with Homunculus, so with the story of Frankenstein and his monster. And you know, I would say that that's what's going to happen, or is happening now, with AI and robotics, really. So this is another, I'm just, where these, coming into the modern era of science, manipulating electricity, but also creation of life, but also the correction of the spiritual outside of ourselves. So these two chaps, as you'll probably know, is Nikola Tesla and Thomas Edison, who famously had this rivalry around, you know, creating the electricity, and what the was it going to be AC or DC, and this sort of thing. But it was all round. They were also very much connected with the ideas of using electricity and using these technological inventions to contact the spiritual world. So Tesla considered the possibility, while experimenting with a crystal radio powered by electromagnetic waves in 1901. The signals he picked up one night were so unnerving that his scientific mind couldn't help but think of ghosts. He wrote in his diary, "My first observations positively terrified me, as there was present in them something mysterious, not to say supernatural, and I was alone in my laboratory at night." In 1918, he wrote of similar sounds he heard after tinkering with another radio, but he was careful not to automatically attribute them to otherworldly sources. I find it difficult to imagine that I am actually hearing real voices from people not of this planet. There must be a more simple explanation that so far eluded me. So Edison learned that Tesla thought his inventions might be able to go on the spiritual plane and contact entities there. And though he criticized seances and mediums at the time, he said in 1920, in an article, The American Magazine, "I have been at work for some time building an apparatus to see if it's possible for personalities which have left this earth to communicate with us still." And he was often, this device became referred to as the spirit phone. And it mentions in this article, like all of his experiments, this one was rooted in science. Edison pulled from the work of Albert Einstein, particularly his theories of quantum entanglement. These are things, obviously, quantum theory that's being quantum computers now, and all sorts of things with that, and special relativity. Edison's thinking went like this: if it's possible to convert mass to energy, then maybe the spirits of living people become coherent units of energy when their bodies stop working. And if entangled particles can affect each other across great distances, as the quantum entanglement theory states, then maybe there's a way for those energy bundles to interact with our physical world. That seems to make a lot of sense to me in a way. I think there's maybe quite a bit in there, but so if we keep going to where we're coming now, and this is the headline behind me, but as I say, this was what referred to Hocus Pocus put on their Facebook, but is so Elon Musk. Solution to Musk's fear of population collapse: artificial womb facility could grow 30,000 babies a year. So I didn't really read the article myself, but obviously these kind of things have been talked about for some time, and we know that they can do this sort of thing. So this, I guess, is some sort of, I don't know if it's from a film or it's just some artistic representation of it. But again, you've got a baby, small form of life within a glass-like container. Look anything like the Homunculus at all? A little bit. And I think as Sarah Mondini put on Facebook, it's like, you know, can they get further away from nature, further away from what's natural? And exactly that's what they're just trying to get, further and further away. So I mean, Mari said this is PR, and yeah, that's, it doesn't, obviously that's not an actual image of something, but
they had those at the exhibitions, the great exhibitions they had.
Yeah, that's very true, Liz. Yeah. So another thing that Mind Unveils talked about on separate videos, Liz mentioned it on previous live stream, with this idea of the, well, one thing about these Cabbage Patch Kids and all these cards that came out, but yeah, ideas of repopulation. But yeah, it's really weird that these what were they called, the fairs, world fairs?
Yeah, but they had incubators.
Yeah, so they had incubators actually at these world fairs, hundreds of them. And yeah, so they were this so they were bigging up this idea of if you like, reproducing life. And I suppose, yeah, I mean, and again, these very small, tiny newborn babies in incubators, that image again is going to be again like this image of the homunculus, about, you know, life contained in a vessel and being grown within this artificial vessel. I mean, I was looking just on Wikipedia at some of the ideas about artificial reproduction. So some philosophers, and Jack Derrida's mentioned here, talk all this sort of talk about humans are not instructed by nature, but rather use nature as raw material to invent. Regardless of the natural restrictions imposed by natural laws, humans find alternatives. Thus, nature is not necessarily mirrored. In accordance with Kant, and contrary to what Aristotle thought, Karl Marx, Alfred Whitehead, Jack Derrida, one David Garcia Baca, all noticed that nature is incapable of reproducing tables or aeroplanes or submarines or computers. If nature tried to make aeroplanes, birds would come out. If nature tried to create submarines, it would get fishes. If nature tried to create computers, brains would grow. According to Whitehead, if we look for something natural and artificial life, in the most elaborate cases, if anything, only atoms remain natural. But where these people are talking about those things as if the artificial is better, I would say the natural is the greater. To me, a bird is a more amazing thing than an aeroplane. A human brain is a greater thing than a computer. Maybe the computer can get to A to B quicker in terms of a thought, but
It's got to be made by us.
yeah, well, yeah, that's true. The computer, at the moment at least, has to be made by a human with their brain. So to me, the the artificial will always be
Less.
it will be lesser. Yeah, it will be like a negative reproduction, an artificial, and it won't be as great as the natural. But you know, some of these philosophers, you know, again, it goes along with this scientism and the idea of like science and technology progress. This is the way forward and the way we get greater. And of course, this is where they're going with to transhumanism, etc. So, you know, some of these philosophers, the artificial is the real, positive, and original negation of the natural, of species, of genus, and of essence. Thus, its ontology is superior to natural ontology. And for this very reason, Marx did not attach any importance to Darwin, whose evolutionism is confined to the natural order. So this idea, basically, that humankind is superior and that what we create is just seen Rick Alden's comment, brains are tastier. Well, yeah, that maybe goes into well, yeah, indeed. But yeah, for me, the natural is superior. I mean, how a human brain can develop in this tiny baby that's formed and just have so much capacity, and we know that there is the brain can do so much, which computers can do. I feel in terms, you know, you get, for me, you know, you got the autistic savants that can do like unbelievable computations within a millisecond. So there is that capacity within the human brain to do those computer-like things. But then again, there is so much more than that to go to other levels, I would say, which is something that the artificial AI cannot get to. But then you've got all these more and more things. I think DJ may have mentioned this. Xenobots may have mentioned that earlier in the chat. Xenomorphs are probably the same sort of thing, but so biology, being the study of cellular life, addresses reproduction in terms of growth and cellular division. However, the science of artificial reproduction is not restricted by the mirroring of these natural processes. The science of artificial reproduction is actually transcending the natural forms and natural rules of reproduction. For example, xenobots have redefined the classical conception of reproduction. Although xenobots are made of eukaryotic cells, they do not reproduce by mitosis, but rather by kinematic replication. I'm sorry, I don't know what all those things. Such constructive replication does not involve growing, but rather building. And that seems, that to me rather sums up really. The growing is the natural process. Evolution, the cycles, what I was saying about rituals of going through the stages of our growth and natural growth, and how the natural cycles of that, things grow, they die, they come back again. But this is something outside that. So it's building, it's artifice, but it's trying to mold the natural with the artificial and the robotic. And yeah, Rachel, the jibber jabbers all going to be involved with that as well. You have cloning, sort of mentioned before briefly.
Japanese, the Japanese, because they're self-replicating injection.
Yeah.
And they're banning it, and you know, people, dentists are saying, don't come near me for 6 months if you've had this injection, because it self-replicates and it can pass on to other people.
Right. Is that mRNA or is that something different again?
So it's in Japan.
In Japan.
They're putting bands on it. It's self-replicating.
Bounds. Yeah. Self-replicate. Well, I suppose, if you like, this is a modern scientific version of that all those legends or stories like the Frankenstein and the Golem. If something can replicate itself, and obviously it's coming, you get the Terminator stuff. you know, when the things they can replicate themselves, then they're going to go out above and beyond what we can control. And that also will mean this go the same for viruses or anything like that. You know, once they can't be controlled. I just had a thought of in the Michael Crichton, I read the novel of the Jurassic Park, and like the science character talking about that, about how you can't sort of contain nature, and there will be, it sort of finds a way to.
That's that famous line.
Yeah.
Nature finds a way. Yeah.
And in that film, it's like they recreate dinosaurs, but they use this sort of frog DNA, but this frog DNA has got a thing where it, because the frog can
male, female.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, so the frog, like, is a hermaphrodite type thing, so it can generate life. Yeah, anyway, but the frog also, just as an aside, is an alchemical symbol that's used quite often. So that image with which to me looks a bit frog-like, again seems like a reference, intentional or not, back to alchemical practices and their symbology. So where they're going with this, I think it also does connect to the ideas of, well, actually, sorry, I'm jumping a little bit ahead. I wanted to say, I mean, just some more like pop culture references. Although when this image, I got this image, I thought, well, that's interesting. It looks a bit, almost a bit Egyptian in the background here. But I do remember this was, I don't know if people watch Doctor Who. I've given up watching it now because it's obviously got so mega woke and can't be bothered with it anymore. But used to really enjoy it up to the sort of Matt Smith and David Tennant. Anyway, I just thought of that because it was like the River Song, where you first meet her and then she dies, and obviously becomes a character later because they're going backwards and forwards and through time. But like, he manages to sort of save her essence, if you like, and it's this idea of like connecting it, like it's stored on like a chip, so it sort of gets plugged in somewhere, so she will be in this like virtual world forever. And it's like, oh wow, he saved her, thank God for that, you know, because she's still in this virtual world. But it's like, especially like this character who's like full of life and going around and like all over the universe, and it's like, oh right, so she's going to be trapped within this little, it was like this little virtual world, having like a sort of garden party or something. It's like, well, that would become some sort of hell, wouldn't it? You know, the idea that you can put the essence of someone into a chip, into some sort of so it gets put into a computer or to a virtual game or an image. You know, so much obviously with science fiction, but and just the other pop culture, obviously it goes into sort of Black Mirror, and there was just this it's San Junipero. I kept wanting to call it San Bernardino, but you know, that, whereas this the technology thing where people like, when they die, or with these people that they're in hospital and sort of critically ill, in a coma or whatever, so they can get their sort of essence put into this virtual world. But again, I mean, like this San Junipero, it's just like some permanent people just going nightclubbing for forever and a day, and just leading the sort of vacuous life that so many people do on this earth, but just on forever and repeat, you know. And so much of the Black Mirror seems to be like modern versions of the sort of medieval pictures of going to hell and the Hellmouths. Yeah, Ron Sposh, who's mentioned in Mind Unveiled. But it, you know, they're trying to sell this, and I agree with Mari that I don't think it's possible. You know, they have these things within other Black Mirror stories as well, and it's like, oh yeah, they can sort of download someone's personality, and then it's like, then you appear in this virtual world, and you're you, and it's like, oh, how did I get here? I'm just, So again, that's this idea of you're creating your life again, or replicating it outside of yourself. I don't think it would be possible. Yeah, you could have some funny little avatar character that sort of moves about, which has got a few mannerisms of you or something like that, or your voice recorded. Oh yeah, I mean the Black Mirror, there is, you know, obviously it goes very dark, but I think, although I'm sure it is also being put out there, the Black Mirror and stuff, in many ways it's part of their agenda and putting things in plain sight. But yeah, really, like if you want to, you know, look at it properly, it is showing the terrible nature of what can happen. You know, it's modern versions of the Frankenstein tale, and it's where science and technology is going. And very interesting, just as an aside, did think it was noticeable, I don't know if other people, but the last series of Black Mirror, I don't know if there's been another one since, but the last one I saw anyway, I thought it was noticeable because all the stories before is all around ideas around the technology, but the last series had several stories which are around, there was like a demon character, and then people had to, this woman had to, like, yeah, at the end of the world, and there was a werewolf episode. So it was very interesting that it was seeming to bring in like old school occult and stuff. D-Wave is. We are Geordie Rose. Yeah. We are connecting with demons, and also CERN. Yeah, Geordie Rose. You know, the terminology they use, and what's the other one? The Susanna Gilder. You know, she's talked about. She referred to herself as witches, and yeah, she does really dark, witchy pictures. So she's into that. And okay, I know all of us, especially Halloween coming up. This actually does fit in as a Halloween. There's because we like drawing pictures of ghosts doesn't mean we want to make a fucking replica of ourselves. No. That's what they want to do because they're narcissists. No. So that's the difference of representation, creativity, analyzing your shadow, looking at it, looking at the dark side. But that's something different again, as Liz says, to the this other level, because they're going to the other level as a way of control of society. Well, yeah. Rick Holden says no one could tell me a fuckwit like Charlie Brooker could write such stuff. Oh yeah, I think it is funny, but yeah, but still, this is some. Yeah. I think it's true. Yeah, no, I think it's true. Yeah. Oh, Kev Baker interviewed Geordie Rose. I didn't know that. Yeah, I've been. Yeah, he also slagged off that Susanna Gilder. Right. But yeah, Liz mentioned CERN, and I was going to mention although it isn't. I know it isn't the opening ceremony for CERN, as is often put on websites and things like that. But that Goddard Tunnel, which is very close to CERN, so it's definitely all connected. But that ceremony where you had the horned figure basically doing, yeah, are we allowed to say that on YouTube? Probably not. Doing naughty things to a woman when she didn't want them to, and then there's like behind the curtain this sort of strange, I can't remember what it looks like, but basically there's a child produced from this demon doing this thing to the woman. So again, it's like creating this monster birth, something unnatural, and this was all in this this ceremony, and yeah, so totally CERN, all this idea of breaking reality, again using science to manipulate. It's very much again a different form of the alchemists and what I think these secret orders have been doing for centuries, way in using esoteric knowledge, hidden knowledge, and to create something else, but to also disrupt what is in existence. Yeah, Cell is a good movie, Whispering. I don't know that one. I'll have to check it out. But where I was going to connect it back, you know, like I did say, like the Black Mirror, you know, it's like these are like visions of hell, but just in a technological world rather than if you like a medieval religious world. But Mind Unveiled again goes through all these paintings and lots of these ones, Last Judgment ones, and this is detail of Giotto, I think he's painting of the Last Judgment, but I'm bigger in it. But there's a lot of where Mind Unveiled talks about these, so many of these paintings where they've got this demon figure, sort of Baphomet figure, where he's often eating children or killing children or humans of some sort or another, but at the same time also reproducing. Yeah, I know. So it's almost, I mean, like some sort of machine for, but it's destroying one form of life, but then reproducing another one at the same time. So, but it does seem like the destruction. That's I suppose my Unveil getting to this basically, that it's all what he's saying is the creation of the homunculus, this alchemical ideas, is all connected with these ideas of the resets and depopulation agendas, and how these have done them in different moments of history where they've emptied out a population or a part of the world, and they've reset it with a new one. So it's an idea of destroying the old population and creating a new one that's mind wiped and can be manipulated again. There's so many of these. This is another one by I think that's Hans Memling. But yeah, as my novel's talking about, it's this idea of being born into a new reality. So the idea, what? Pooping out a new population? Yeah. There's an awful lot of talk in that video about pooping. Yeah, there was so many of there's so much of this imagery around the anus, and because so much as well, this supposed to be the rituals. It was said to be a Templars ritual, and all these things often talk about what they say, witches, demon worshippers, etc. I forget what they call it, but kissing the anus of Baphomet or the devil. Yeah, that's we're all supposed to be part of the ritual. So it's just, I guess again, it's the idea of reversing what's natural. So yeah, life coming out of the anus. It's an unnatural act of reproduction. But I suppose in many ways, like my novel talking about Jesus being like a homunculus, but he's supposed to be in these paintings. He's the one presiding over this new order, if you like, a regeneration where the old world is left behind and the people were tortured and killed and cast into the depths, and the chosen ones going up to heaven, and they're living in a lovely new world. So I think, what's that then?
I don't know if I can say it.
Can you do it in a cryptic way?
I'll do it in a dance.
Interpretive dance.
I'll say it after.
All right. Okay. So where you've got these concepts of creating artificial life, artificial reproduction. Now, well, I think there's the different. I think in some ways they've made modern people, modern children, unfortunately, with the growth of a lot of mental illness, and we know what's happened with technology, especially through lockdowns. But they're creating vessels which are open to possibly to spirits going into them. Obviously, Jerry Marzinski's talked a lot about that. So this idea of the homunculus, often, you make create a spiritual version, and then it can go into the empty vessel that's been created. So I think there's maybe something of that going on where people are being made empty, so they are themselves empty vessels that can be impregnated with these or taken over by these entities or whatever. But even if that possession is merely the manipulation of the material forces, what we know they can do with technology, and I talked before about the early versions of radio and TV and how a lot of people designing those were also into the spiritual and the idea of connecting with the spirit world. And we know that things like TV and film and now the internet are used to manipulate and make people open to suggestion. So they're a form of possession themselves. That's the way they've become. But also, as I say, I talk about, I know, the lost children, but so we've got lost children in terms of what powerful people might use children for in rituals and that sort of thing to try and alter reality. But there's also there she is, guest appearance. Oh blimey. Oh dear, sorry about that if you did. So, but I think on another level, the extreme of lost children, if you like, in many ways, is just them not being born. And I mentioned in the title, Children of Men, and this is a still from the film. Liz pointed out that the sign says 30, so Agenda 2030 maybe.
Well, yeah, of all the signs.
Yeah.
I mean, how many different signs could they have had? There's one fucking sign standing. It's got 30 on. And a 3.
I mean, I think it's a brilliant film, and the book's very interesting as well. But the book's sort of, especially it's got this sort of Oxbridge, because it's P.D. James in it. Unusual that she chose to do as a one science fiction film, book rather. That. But I think that was a bit like Margaret Atwood with The Handmaid's Tale, that she wasn't known for writing science fiction, but then she did The Handmaid's Tale, and obviously The Handmaid's Tale is another one where it's a world where not many children are conceived, and that becomes part of the dystopia that very few women can give birth. But yeah, Children of the film version, obviously the sort of director made it, if you like, more up to date, and it was sort of more action packed. But I think it sort of struck so many chords. I remember reading. It was interesting. I read an article. It was in the Guardian. No. I read an article in the Guardian. But it was saying about how many things, so much of it was like ringing true of what was happening. Obviously, you got things about immigration and stuff there. Although obviously the Guardian wouldn't be doing it in the same sort of looking at it the same sort of way. But and the ideas of dystopia and authoritarian rule. But of course, the punchline was, the Guardian said, oh, funny enough, the only thing that didn't strike true as actually being something of concern and real life dystopia was the main premise of the film, that that no children be born, because in actual fact we've got far too big a population. It's actually overpopulation that's causing the problem. But that, of course, we know that the eugenicists who have fed into all this, the people that run all that climate agenda and everything else, and the people in power. But they talk openly, of course. Oh yeah, we need to be millions less on the planet. But so many people don't actually grasp that you're saying, so millions of women, men, and children the Earth would be better off if they didn't exist. That's basically what you're saying to that, if you have that mindset with the climate change agenda. But yeah, for me, the children and men, it's becoming certainly this idea of because the fertility rates were plummeting even before the nonsense of 2020 onwards. So now it's becoming even more critical. We know things, again, reproductive cycles have been disrupted. Fertility, again, in a reversal of what the Neolithic rituals were all about. Fertility is being disrupted and reversed so that the fertility levels are plummeting. So yeah, so in children and men, there is you know, there are no children being born anymore, and then of course a woman does give. No, they don't say why. No, they don't say why. But I mean that. So why I'm bringing it up now, I guess, because that, to me, I think Liz said some time ago about, you know, people will not be able to have children anymore. Then it will be like, well, have this little robot as your surrogate supplement of a child.
I also said, why the hell? Dogs have always been a thing. We all love dogs.
You can speak to the camera.
All right. Speak to the camera. All right. Bits hanging out.
She's got bits hanging out. Yep.
Yes, everybody loves dogs. We've always loved dogs, apparently. Apparently, Britain is a nation of dog lovers. Well, yep. Who said? But I love a dog. Yep. But all of a sudden, it became... There's actual TikToks of people saying, I love my dog more than my baby. Yeah. And I was like, where the fuck did that come from? And I think it's trying to get women used to not having fucking children. Yep. So they've got to have their maternal thing, and it's all about dogs. They dress them up as children now. Yeah, yeah.
You know, dogs, other pets, becoming surrogates for children.
Said, where the fuck what's this all about?
Yeah.
Years ago, do you remember?
Yeah, yeah. But yeah, another level of that, and obviously there's been science fiction films aplenty about that idea as well. So again, you know, I think, you know, maybe is this another level where it's like the reset, a depopulation, so then they can repopulate, and they can repopulate potentially with some form of transhumanism, robotics. So the lost child, where it's crucial to our society, our world, our reality, because it will break down, it breakdowns around it. DJ's asking if you put your clothes on. Oh, okay. I've already got involved. Oh, Linda. Hello, Linda. Great to see you last weekend, Linda. So yeah, it seems like it's a case of that's what they want to do. So the lost child, maybe the ultimate, is where there are no more children being born, and then that's the ultimate break with the natural in terms of humanity and the reproductive. And so then people would be crying out for, oh, we have to embrace this artificial reproduction, this artificial form of life. And then if people say, oh, look, it's all right, we can clone you, we can clone a child that will be a miniature part of you. Yeah.
Mini version of you.
And that could be, in terms of what the alchemists of old wanted to do, that could be the ultimate victory of that there's going to. But as I say, Mind and Veil, I haven't fully gone into it. Liz only recently discovered them, and I've just been going through, let's say, a 10-hour video on the Homunculus, which I've watched. But he's done a lot on. I think it'd be interesting. I think connecting, because I've said before, a lot of research on the lost child, obviously, before I got into a lot of, shall we say, the conspiratorial and the rest of it, but it does really tie in. Hello, Steve. Sofas. Hello. I mean, I mentioned in my book, and I've mentioned in previous talks about child migration. It was mentioned in passing by Mind Unveiled in a different talk, but he talks about like the orphan trains in America that took kids all around that were supposed to be orphans to sort of help populate these new towns that were growing up around America. And I think what he's saying is, you know, where did all these orphans come from? And he's thinking that maybe some of these were artificially produced, and that this was part of a way of repopulating after there'd been a reset. He mentioned in passing this sort of child migration that happened from Britain, and you know, I've written about it in my books, but you know, striking so many of these children, again, well, a lot of them are said to be orphans, but they weren't. They did have living relatives, but they were in homes. And so many of the they were like religious institutions. Barnardos did it, and these children, they were coerced to say, oh, you know, you got this wonderful world, oranges and sunshine. That was a term which was used. Kind of the title of the book, Ken Loach's son. True. Ken Loach's son, I can't remember his first name, but he did a film of it. It was a book from Empty Cradles, which was biography written by, I can't remember the name of the lady, but she ended up starting this child migrant trust. She was a social worker, and yeah, I mean, it's just shocking the numbers that were basically transported out to the different colonies, many to Australia, some New Zealand, what was called Rhodesia, Canada, and terms I talk about in my book that were used at the time for, they were fresh links from the forge to go and help the empire, and they were described in these terms of like they were material basically for the imperial dream to populate these colonies, because obviously they were depopulating these countries of the indigenous population. So then they were repopulating with the people from Britain, etc. So again, this idea of resetting, repopulating, and taking children, whether they're in orphans or at least in care homes. So yeah, I just thought it's worth putting that in, because I think it is crucial to this. It does all connect up with this idea of creating artificial life, but destroying the real and the natural, real families, real methods of reproduction, the natural world. And yeah, so I think we've reached the end. I think that's it. Yeah. That's it, everyone. I think we were trying to put an extra thing, but we never quite managed it. But yeah, Maori slave labor. I mean, they were used as that. Many of the child migrants, many suffered terrible abuse. But yeah, many were used as cheap slave labor. You know, working on farms and having to build. There was one, was it Christian Brothers in, I think, the west of Australia, who that was a very nasty time of abuse. A lot of the kids suffered, but also they had to build this amazing in terms of grand structure that they all lived in. So but yeah, all right, so I think we'll probably we'll have to draw a line on it now, but people need milk. I probably need a decaf and a lie down. There's been some fascinating talk in the chat. I'll go back over it because I couldn't catch all of it as I was talking through, but some great points being made. So yeah, well, thanks all for joining. It's lovely to have you all here. And
Linda, did you get my email?
Linda, did you get an email about an event? Green Tea says she sent you an email.
Right.
Thank you, Green Tea. Thanks all. Thanks for listening. And
waiting for Linda to reply.
Well, Linda can email you.
I'm waiting for Linda to reply.
Liz is waiting for Linda. Did you get an email, Linda?
Are you coming?
From Liz. All right. Well, I'll end it now, but we'll see you again very soon.
Oh, okay. Bye.
See ya. Bye. Love to everyone. Bye.